Hey guys, my name is Faustina, and I'm just a 24-year-old girl who has fallen in love with the writings that Jesus gave to his servant of God, Luisa, the Book of Heaven. These writings teach us about the gift that God wants to give back to mankind, which is the original gift that Adam and Eve lost in the garden after they fell. It's incredible. I'm not going to get very much into the introductory stuff in this video because I already made a few other videos about this. So if you are watching this video and you haven't watched those and you want to continue watching this video, I would suggest you go back and watch What is the Gift of Living in the Divine Will? And then the next video after that one is called How to Really Live in the Divine Will. So it's talking about how to receive the gift. And this video is a continuation on those two videos. So you will probably be confused if you don't know what I'm talking about. I would suggest you watch those if you would like to watch this one. I'm going to make the same disclaimer that I made in my last video by saying that this topic that I'm about to talk about in the Divine Will, there are a lot of different opinions about it. If you ask any teacher in the Divine Will about the 4 degrees and what they look like and how to enter the Divine Will and can you borrow the gift or can you not go back and forth, like, I will say this opinion that I have come to personally is one that I have been praying about pretty intensely for the past 8 months. I started asking him, Jesus, these questions to clarify like what these things mean. I want to know because I want to understand the gift as much as I can. And this is the understanding that he has led me to. I am definitely not going to say it's infallible. I think I want to remind everyone to take anything any teacher says with a grain of salt. Keep what is helpful, throw out what is not. Pray and discern. I could be wrong in anything I say. Alright, so as soon as we have disposed our hearts truly to receive the gift of the Divine Will, and by that really meaning that just no matter where we are in our state of life, no matter how advanced we are spiritually, we sincerely have made a firm desire of the will that we desire God to be first, others second, us third. And we sincerely desire and intend, making a firm resolution that we really mean, that we are not going to sin anymore. Even if it's possible you could fall after that. But as long as a firm desire and intention is there, now your heart's disposed, you receive the gift of living in the Divine Will. And if you recall, in my original video when I talked about what is the gift of living in the Divine Will, I used the example of a mandarin orange, and I said that it was a symbol for the sun, S-U-N, which Jesus often uses as a symbol of the divine will, of his eternal operating. And keeping in mind that God's eternal operating is outside of time and space, and so he operates on an eternal, infinite, immense level, whereas the human operates, even when they do good actions, they operate on a finite level. But God's action is eternal, infinite, immense. Okay, and so yeah, the analogy I used was with a mandarin orange to represent the sun, but now all I have is a potato. So you'll have to bear with me. This potato is now a symbol for the eternal, infinite, immense, divine will of God operating all throughout time and space, past, present, and future. Okay, so that's okay. God made the potato. He loves them. He doesn't mind. So this analogy is, this is the human will, and this is what happens to Adam. This is what happens to us. When we receive the gift of living in the divine will, God puts his eternal, infinite, immense operating within the empty space of our human will that has made the space for him, right, to enter, that all we want is him, right? So now he has all the space to enter, and he begins to, whether you realize it or not, like you probably don't have that much of an awareness of what exactly is happening, and that's okay. You don't have to, and you will grow in this knowledge as time goes. But once you receive this gift, God is fused with you. He begins to operate eternal, immense, infinite acts in every act that you do. And so it doesn't have to be, you don't change anything you do. You live your life. You eat your food. And so it's Jesus eating that avocado toast, but in an eternal, immense, and infinite way that gives eternal, immense, infinite glory to God on a scale that's due to him, to the Father, right? But it's not just the things, it's not just the actions you do, it's not just the words you say or the prayers that you do. It's also when you blink your eye. It's also when your heart is beating, when your digestive tract is doing what it's supposed to do, like involuntary things, all of these things. The divine will fuses within you and operates all of these eternal, immense, infinite acts. And Jesus says that the value contained in just the tiniest things, like the involuntary motions of the creature, all of them actually contain the same value. They all contain infinite merit. And there's countless actions that we do, right, throughout the day. Like I'm performing thousands of them right now just as my body is functioning. And Jesus is performing them with me. And therefore, there are thousands and thousands of infinite, eternal acts that, because they're fused with God, they are swept up into the one eternal act that is God, right? Because God only does one act, and it's eternal, and it contains everything. When he said, "Fiat lux, let there be light," it contained he spewed out all of time and everything that ever will be, and it's all contained in this one. And so when the one fuses with time, when the infinite fuses with time, every single act that somebody does in time actually is married to this infinite eternal scale. And so when you blink your eye, that contains the same merit as God creating the entire universe, and it's multiplied. Really what's happening is God is being multiplied and reflected in every instant. And that's what glorify really means. To glorify God means to reflect him, right? And so every time God looks down and sees a soul in the divine will blinking their eyes, actually what's happening is God is getting an infinite return of love for everything he ever gave us. And all of that love that he has concentrated in us, giving us the energy to blink our eyes, is being returned back to him. And so the love between the soul and God is actually growing. And so not only is God getting the same return of everything he ever put out, but the added return in every instant, ever growing for all of eternity, the return of the specific love of that specific creature that he made. So this is just a little bit of what the gift of the divine will is. And so it's really a love story now between you and God. Like, this is how he intended it. All that being said, keeping in mind the fact, like, this gift, when it goes into you, you possess it. It's not a back and forth thing. You don't like borrow it whenever you think of it. Oh, I fuse in the divine will. Because Jesus does tell Luisa, it is very good to be attentive to the divine will living in you, because the more attentive you are, the more you are going to grow in love of God, right? And the more his eternal infinite impact within you is actually going to have an impact on the world and on purifying your own soul. So it is important to be attentive, and if you've heard anything about the Divine Will community before, you may have heard the words fusing, or doing your entering in prayer, or the prevenient act, or doing your rounds throughout the day. Basically, all of these words truly mean like you are drawing attention to the fact that the divine will is living in you. Jesus is living in you, doing these acts with you, and that your primary job is to be in this love story with God. And because you're drawing attention to that fact, you enter into it throughout the day. I intend to do all my actions in the divine will today. Every morning you wake up, it's called the prevenient act. You remind yourself, I'm living in the divine will, fused with God, and I intend to give him glory, past, present, and future, like for all the glory that was not due to him, for all the souls that were supposed to live in the divine will but didn't because of the fall. This is a bit about what repairing and redoing the acts are, which I'll probably go into more detail in a later video. And so if you understand God dwelling in you and living his life in a creature who is living their life in time, is he is able to multiply the glory that is given to God, and ultimately the glory that is able to be enjoyed by all the blessed in heaven when we get there, and all of the graces that are being spread out through all the world. God is actually multiplying them from within the creature, not because he needs us, but because he set it up this way, because he wants us. He wants to work with us, and so he made it this way. So he lives within us, and he is exuding light and grace and like wonderful helps for souls, helping them to come to him throughout all generations, past, present, and future, from within every act you do. So nothing is going to change to increase or diminish the infinite immense power that is contained in this sun, this potato, God. But what can happen is that a soul can be more or less attentive to God's operating within them. And a soul can, yeah, with their imperfections, with their defects, with their lacks of abandonment, they can form, you could say, clouds around the sun. And so if the sun is radiating from within them, but then they are not, they're being kind of careless, they're not being attentive to that fact, they are, having imperfection, voluntary imperfections. Like God is still in them, but his power is not being able to be spread as much as it would be, because the rays of the sun are more powerful when there's no clouds in front of the sun. Because there's clouds in front of the sun, it doesn't take away the fact that the sun is there preserving everything and, in a symbolic way, like actually generating all of this grace. But when we are not attentive, we form clouds around the sun. And so God's impact on the world and the glory that is being given back to the Father is actually not as radiant, not as effective, not as powerful as it could be if we were not forming these clouds. And Jesus uses this analogy often to Luisa, and he exhorts her too. She had been living in the divine will for a long time at this point. And here's what she says: "My love, in these days the circumstances have been such that I have felt distracted, and therefore be attentive, because when what you do does not flow in my will, it happens as if the sun stopped its course, and when you are distracted, you form clouds before the sun, and you remain obscured. However, when the distractions are involuntary, a strong and resolute act of your will to run in my will is enough to place the sun on its course and, like rapid breeze, to dispel the clouds, in order to make the sun of my will shine more beautifully." And so he very often tells her as well that she doesn't go back and forth. She never actually leaves his will. But when he sometimes refers to these little exits that she may make, this not following her course in the divine will, it's more that she kind of pauses, she kind of stops the motion, she forms clouds around the sun, and she impedes the impact that the divine will have on all generations, past, present, and future, on the glory that is being given to God and the joy that is being given to all the saints in heaven, but also with the purification that is happening in her soul as well. And so that is why those prayers, those little remembrances that we repeat throughout the day, constantly trying to be aware of Jesus's presence within us, like really operating in us, are important, because they remind us to keep on track, to remember, this is what I'm about, the divine will. I am a living host, this is my mission. Because when we do get distracted, then we often fall into our imperfections. We become worried, we become disturbed, and these are all things that will impede our growth. In volume 16th, February 10th, 1924, Jesus talks to Luisa. He gives the analogy of a castle. He gives the analogy of a palace, and he talks to her about how important it is that souls not only will dispose themselves to receive the gift of living in the divine will, but that after they've received the gift of the divine will, they know the value of what they've received, and they understand how to live in the divine will in a more perfect way. It's actually, honestly, this is one of the reasons why this book is important to actually read. It's important to read about the divine will, because while it's possible to receive the gift without having read the volumes, Jesus teaches us more and more how to live perfectly, so that we can not only have the gift, but grow to complete fullness in the gift and have the greatest impact on the world, right? Anyway, in that writing, in volume 16, he says that, the divine will, when a soul comes to live in it, it's like a palace that has many floors. But when the soul comes to live in the divine will, if she is always looking out the window, kind of looking back at the world that she used to have, the life that she used to have, which is really the world of fears, disturbances, having your eyes basically down here instead of up here in perfect trust. He tells her that there is a danger that the soul will one day leave if she doesn't understand the great value of the good she possesses, and if she lives in the divine will in a way that is not completely abandoned and perfect trust. He tells Luisa often that whenever she would, because she also had imperfections too, right? She's like us. She had the original sin, and it's being purified out of her bad habits. And one of those bad habits was to become worried all the time, to become disturbed. She in particular was disturbed that her state in life was actually not the will of God. She would become disturbed about her imperfection. She would become disturbed about her weaknesses and kind of speculate on, I'm not living in the divine will, questioning, self-reflections, too much navel gazing, and Jesus would tell her that these were clouds that she was forming around the sun, and they were impeding her from growing deeper. And so that's why, it's important to live abandoned in the divine will and know that we don't have to be looking out the windows of the castle. We actually should be exploring the great depth of the castle, seeing all the rooms, like looking at all the beautiful treasures God has spread out for us, the lunch table, with just an array of anything we could ever want. Yeah, there are a lot of people in the divine will who say that, there is only living in the divine will and not living in the divine will. And once you give your fiat, once you give your yes to dispose your heart to receive that gift, then it's just immediate. And then everything you do is just basically you're there, you're perfect, right? I don't think that point of view is supported in the writings. One example of this, which I think is really important for us to know if we want to have a game plan of how to live in the divine will, how to grow, how to do this thing. Volume 35, August 23rd, 1937. You must know that the more the creature seeks my will, wanting to know it, loving it, and not letting it escape in each of her acts, basically just being attentive like we talked about, the more my will grows to its fullness. One more little attention is enough to make it grow. A sigh, a desire for its life. It awaits the invitation to grow. My daughter, there is a great difference between those who are all attentive, all eyes, and all heart for my will, and those who just want it, without any special attention. Maybe they possess my will in small part, but its fullness is far from them. So this idea, when you live in the divine will, Jesus does acts within you, right? ACTS, divine, infinite, eternal acts. And the more he does those within you and the deeper he draws you to himself, he makes you more and more identified with him. And so, yes, he is in all fullness, like within you, but that doesn't mean that you have been fully woven into everything that is him. And this is a bit of a mystery. No analogy is ever going to be completely perfect. I had an analogy come to my mind about what these acts do in relation to our human will, because Jesus tells Luisa that the more acts we do in the divine will fused with God, it's like the more identified we become with him and the harder it will be for us to leave, right? Because Adam was conceived in the gift of the divine will. He was created in it. Adam and Eve both were. Yet they still ended up breaking apart from the divine will. Like, how can that be if you're fused, like you have a will? Well, the thing is that the more acts a soul does in the divine will, I had this image come to my mind that it's like there are threads being woven between the potato and the cup, right? Between the divine will and the human will. And every act that the soul repeats in the divine will, and I would say that going back to the importance of abandonment for our self-application, like these acts would need to be complete. Like these acts would need to be like, we are not clouding up this thing with our doubts, with our worries, with our imperfections, right? With our not cooperating with God's purification when he points things out to us that he wants us to work on. We form clouds around the sun and we're not able to be fully woven into him with that act that he was trying to do within us. And so, going back, every act that is unimpeded by our own clouds, right? It's like we are being woven more and more into God. And it becomes easier and easier the more of these completely abandoned acts, the more attentive we are, the more rapid it begins. Oh, this is more natural, more natural, more natural. We have more and more of a taste for doing these acts, and God is able to weave us into him at kind of an exponential rate because we are not clouding this up with any of our imperfections, right? And so I do think the growth in the divine will, it speeds up towards the end because we're getting better at not getting in the way. But anyway, I had this image come to my mind of a Eucharistic miracle I saw a picture of, the Eucharistic miracle of Sokolka, that gave me an analogy for this. If you see in the picture, the host, the white piece, is woven in with the red, the piece of flesh, in this miracle. God allowed it to be so that these microfibers, these microfibers of woven in flesh with the I mean, technically it was consecrated host, so it was Jesus, but the part that just looked like bread, right? Like these two things, these two substances were woven into each other with threads. And I just think of that as the analogy, like we're becoming living hosts. When you receive this gift in the divine will, you are a living tabernacle because the Holy Trinity is truly dwelling within you. But I'd say like the more acts you do in the divine will, you're not only a living tabernacle that contains the Eucharistic presence of Jesus, but you become woven into that, and you actually become not only a living tabernacle, but a living host. Like you are the host, because your will, the more acts you repeat in the divine will, the more identified you become. You may hear people in the divine will talking about how it is impossible to sin once you live in the divine will. And that is not true, because I do not believe that is true, technically, because Adam and Eve were conceived possessing the gift of the divine will. They were doing these eternal acts with God, yet they did sin, they fell, right? I think that the distinction, though, is that they had not completed enough acts that they got to a certain point, so they did not have enough threads in them that it brought them to the point where it was just basically impossible for them to separate, right? So the more threads that you have woven into yourself, the more of these unimpeded, abandoned acts that you do with God fused in you, the harder and harder it is going to be for you to leave. It'll still be possible no matter how hard you rip away. But if you've only done one act in the divine will, like, it's going to be pretty hard. It's going to be pretty easy to just kind of rip that apart, right? If you do 2 acts, it's going to be a little bit harder. 3, 4, 5, 6. If you've done like 100 acts in the divine will, it's going to be like, do I really want to sin? No, I don't want to sin. And like technically you always have your free will, but it's just going to be more and more unnatural. And of course this isn't to say that God chains you like it's impenetrable chains, but no, remember, this is your human will that is becoming identified with God. It's changing the nature, the makeup of you, I think, like in a sense. And so it's just going to become more and more natural for you to want what God wants, naturally, like not in a begrudging type of way. But yeah, for Adam and Eve, we don't know how long exactly they were in the garden or how many acts in the divine will they did, but they had not yet reached the point of full possession, right? Because going back to that reading, there's a difference between possessing the divine will in part and possessing it totally, completely, in all its fullness. There's a distinction there. So yeah, after Adam and Eve passed the test, if Adam and Eve had passed the test, then due to the nature of that test, that it was a hard sacrifice for them, it would have been probably like a big act, probably like a lot of threads put into them in that moment, and they would have in that moment, I believe Jesus tells Luisa, they would have been confirmed in good, like in a similar way to the souls in heaven. Because Jesus also tells Luisa that even the souls in heaven still have their free will. They never technically lose their free will. It's just that they have so much knowledge about the divine will that they would never ever want to do their own. They have more light, right? And they've made their choice that they want heaven. But yeah, Adam would have reached that point after the test. It's the same for us. Like when we receive this gift, yeah, I believe this is the answer. Some people will talk about a borrowing phase, like you have the gift for a while, you go back and forth doing your will, doing God's will, until gradually you only want to do God's will. I don't see it that way. I see it more as like, no, you possess this gift. This is your life, and I mean, you only get this if you make a firm decision anyway, and you're disposed, which is kind of something that not a lot of people wanted to be disposed to. And so you possess this gift, and now what you need to do once you possess it is to start performing your acts fused with Jesus and start living a life that is abandoned to him. And he will bring you through like some tests. He will help you grow, give you opportunities to practice virtue. And these, I think at this point of the game, they're very important to abandon to these tests, to abandon to the practice of virtue and to the crosses that God will put in your life. You need to embrace them, because that will be sealing you in deeper and deeper and deeper. Because when you first receive this, if you're not super advanced in spiritual life, it'll be kind of easy to fall off again, right? Because will have been a few threads woven into you, but the deeper you go, the more threads you weave by being very attentive to Jesus, doing his acts within you, the more you're going to be inseparable from God. And there will be basically what happens in the divine will. There are various tests, but you basically go through a crucifixion. I'll get more into detail with this later, but basically Jesus puts you through a test. He will crucify you, and there will be a certain point of no return. I mean, technically, we will always still have our free will, like I said, even in heaven, but there is a certain point of confirmation in good. And this is what our Blessed Mother experienced. Granted, she experienced it in the womb, but I think it's, for those who say that there's only one state of living in the divine will, either all fullness or not at all, and there's not an in-between, I want to read just this very brief sentence from the Virgin Mary in the Kingdom of the Divine Will. Even Mary experienced a time where she did not possess the complete fullness of the kingdom of the divine will within her. She was conceived in it, and she goes through these days where the divine will was living in her soul, and she was taking more and more steps, like weaving more and more, like these acts, being one with God. And this is day 7. It says, "As I took possession of the kingdom of the divine will, its steps within me ended, and its full life began, whole and perfect within my soul." And so this is after Mary had passed her test. Like I said, this happened to her all while she was still in the womb, but still, like, she had to be tested. And before the point when she was tested, like, she did not possess the entire kingdom, meaning she had not yet passed the test and reached a certain degree of a number of acts woven into her that God could see that he could fully trust, like that this could be deposited into her. You don't have to understand what the fullness of the kingdom means right now. This is kind of really deep stuff. But yeah, basically that is a stage of in confirmation in good. And Jesus does tell Luisa, like, she was confirmed in good, Mary was, after she had passed the test. And she was no longer able to sin, although Mary did not technically know that during her life. And so she was always still careful anyway. But yeah, she was confirmed in good after the test. Not before it, though. She had free will too. All right, I'm going to read one more passage from the Book of Heaven that will kind of drive home this point that, yeah, understanding that when we receive the gift of the divine will, when we actually dispose ourselves to receive it and do, it's a really big deal. It's incredible what happens. But as we repeat our acts in the divine will, we come to a certain stage of fullness, of completion, and of, safety. We are not going to fall anymore. And it's important to know that this is the game plan and this is the roadmap and what we need to be focusing on, right? Because we want to get there. Okay, so this is from volume 34, June 28th, 1937. "My daughter, daughter of my will, if you knew what our contentment is in seeing the soul enter into our will," so just starting out, "it can be said that she runs toward us and we toward her, and as we meet, our will invests her with light, our love kisses her, our power takes her into its arms, our wisdom directs her, our sanctity invests her and impresses itself like a seal, our beauty embellishes her, in sum, the whole of our divine being surrounds her, an attitude of giving her our own. But do you know why? Because by entering into our will in order to live, not of her will but of ours, we receive what came out of us. We feel we are given back the purpose for which we created her, and therefore we make feast. There is no act more beautiful, no scene more enchanting than the creature's entering into our will. And each time she enters, so do we renew her within our divine being, giving her new charisms of love." And I interpret this each time she enters as renewing our acts, having the attentiveness to remind yourself, like, this is what I want to be doing. Abandoned acts in the divine will. Because Jesus often tells Luisa that there is no going back and forth in the eternal operation of the divine will. So that's why I think this is interpreted in this way. Anyway, I'm going back. Okay. "Therefore, one who lives in our will keeps us in feast. She feels the need to live in it in order to be cuddled by her Creator, and we feel the need to be cuddled by her and to give her new charisms of grace and sanctity. My daughter, do not be marveled by what I told you. Rather, I will tell you even more surprising things. But how I wish that all would listen, so that all would decide to live in my will. Listen to how consoling and beautiful is what my love pushes me to tell you. My love is so great that I feel the need to tell you where we reach for one who lives in our will. Now you must know that as the soul decides repeatedly and firmly, to no longer live of her will but of ours, her name is written in heaven with indelible characters of light, and she is enlisted in the celestial militia as heiress and daughter of the kingdom of the divine will. But this is not enough for our love. We confirm her in good in a way that she will feel such horror towards the slightest sin that she will no longer be capable of falling into it. Not only this, but she will remain confirmed in the goods, in the love, in the sanctity of her Creator. She will be invested with the prerogative of the blessed. She no longer will be looked upon as exiled one, and if she is on earth, she is there as an officiant of the celestial militia, not as exile. She will have all goods at her disposal. She will be able to say, because his will is fully mine, what belongs to God is mine. Even more, she will feel as the possessor of her Creator, and since she no longer operates with her will, but with mine, and this isn't that she loses her free will, but because she chooses continually to operate no longer with her will, but with his, because he's shown her how amazing it is and has confirmed her in the knowledge of this. Because of this, all the barriers that prevented her from feeling her Creator have broken. Distances have disappeared. Dissimilarities between she and God no longer exist. She will feel so loved by he who created her as to feel her heart explode with love, to love the one who loves her, and to feel loved by God is the greatest joy, honor, and glory for the creature. My daughter, do not be marveled. These are our aims, the purpose for which we created the creature, to find in her our life, our will reigning, our love, in order to be loved and to love her. And if it were not so, the creation would be a work unworthy of us. Dang. Okay, so all of this is to whet your appetite and inspire you to not only want to dispose yourself to receive the gift of the divine will and to begin living in it, but to repeat your acts in such an abandoned way and to allow God to put you through the tests and trials and the purifications that will be necessary to bring you to that place of complete fullness of possession, of that fullness of having passed that test, which Adam never reached. Remember, Adam was only in the first part of this. But we have the opportunity to be able to live in the fullness of the divine will, to possess the entirety of the kingdom, to be on earth not as exiled, but as officiating of the celestial militia. Heaven will look down upon a soul who is living in this fullness of the divine will and see not a soul who is living on earth, but a soul who is a citizen of heaven in every sense of the word. But who has the added benefit of being able to endure suffering and earn merit of suffering. It's incredible. Saints would write about like how if souls in heaven could have one wish, they have everything they could possibly desire, but if souls in heaven, if they could have anything, it would be that they would want to come back down to earth and suffer more to earn more merit, because now in heaven they see how amazing it is, and how much glory it gives to God. But this is the privilege that we have now. Like, if a soul in the divine will, when we receive this gift, if we grow to this fullness of life in the divine will, we are actually like the state of a soul who was able to actually get sent back down and to be able to continue to live their life, but earning not only merit of suffering more for God, but eternal, immense, and infinite merit of suffering for love of God. And because we're fused with God in his divine will, he actually tells Luisa that he gives a soul his same merit. And so we get the same reward of Jesus as he died to save all souls, because technically Jesus has the merit as if he had saved every soul, every single soul, even though many souls rejected him, because it's what is in the will that really counts. But when a soul has become so identified and has received this gift of fusion, and Jesus is actually living his life in them, he is so incredibly generous that he gives us, who have lived in the divine will, the same merit as he has for having saved all souls, past, present, and future, even though some rejected it. Yeah, this is the incredible glory that we get to have. This is that we get with this gift. And so, goodness gracious, don't waste this opportunity. Don't hold yourself back and stunt your growth by not living completely abandoned in the divine will, and by not fully embracing the crosses that Jesus sends you, and by not making an effort to read these writings and grow more and more in the knowledge, because the more knowledge is that you obtain through this, it's not that more knowledge equals more glory. This isn't Gnosticism. That's a heresy. But it's that the more knowledge you have, the more you're going to be able to live abandoned. Like reading the lives of the saints, it's like that. Like the more we read, the more we and apply these things. It's not just about knowing, it's about applying. And so the more we read and apply Jesus' lessons that he gives to us through Luisa, the more we will know how to abandon ourselves so that we can grow more and more and more to that fullness. Okay. Talk about is this chart that I made that is based upon the writing that we just read, and also upon some other writings where Jesus goes into more detail about what these different degrees of growth in the divine will look like. So if you see here, this white symbolizes the first degree, in which a soul is not yet living in the divine will. They may have heard of the writings, they may have heard of Luisa, and they want the gift, but they haven't yet come to that complete, full decision. Their hearts are not yet quite disposed enough to make that decision. But once they are, they make the decision, and they enter into the divine will. And this is in the reading, so this light blue section symbolizes the reading that I just read to you, where the soul first makes the decision and enters, and the glorious things that happen, Jesus fuses with her, the divinity overshadows her, and she begins to do her acts in the divine will with God. And then, more and more and more, the soul repeats her acts. As she repeats her acts, Jesus purifies her more and more, and he leads her to a place of that complete perfection, that complete possession. This is where in the last reading I just read, the screen turns to clouds, right? Because the soul is in this fourth degree. She is has the same rights as the souls in heaven. She's on earth no longer as exiled, but as officiating the celestial militia. And she is no longer capable of falling. Now, I will say, even souls in the second degree, like, they're only given this gift if they are really disposed to not want to sin anymore. And while it would still always be possible for them to fall in these degrees, it really will be unlikely, I would say. I mean, in my opinion, based on what I've read in the writings, I don't think they would be falling, going back and forth. Although, who knows? This is a mystery. Anything is possible with God. But not after this fourth degree, not after this confirmation in good, because this is the degree that Adam never reached, right? I think that these two writings shed light on each other, and I think they go together, because there's 3 degrees, really, of living in the divine will, because the first degree, technically, the soul hasn't yet made the decision. So I think these 2 writings shed light on each other. In my opinion, imperfect means second degree, perfectly living in the divine will means third degree, and completely living in the divine will means that fourth degree, confirmation. So if you notice, I made this chart blue instead of yellow, because usually the sun is a symbol for the divine will, but another symbol that I really, really love is the sea, or sometimes I picture a lake. Like when you first enter to live in the divine will, you're entering into the lake, you're getting in the water, and the more you repeat your acts, and going back to that binding of the thread, the weaving of the threads, like the more acts you do, the more acts you repeat, like the deeper you venture out into the sea, into the middle of the lake. You're walking down deeper, and then, so you could say the second degree is when you enter, you are swimming out in the sea, but your head is still kind of above the water. The third degree is where you sink down lower to the bottom of the sea, but you're just kind of below the surface, and you're filled with water inside and out. But then that fourth degree is you keep repeating your acts and binding yourself and cooperating with the tests and the sacrifices God puts you through. You end up becoming utterly dissolved and sinking down to the deepest bottom of the sea, which ultimately, even in this fourth degree, when we reach it, there is no end to it, because there is no end to God, because he's infinite. And so we'll always keep going deeper and deeper toward the center of God, which we will never actually find because he's infinite, which is the greatest. Okay, anyway, so I'm going to read to you from volume 11, June 29th, 1914, about these imperfect, perfect, and complete ways of living in the divine will. Then, finding myself in my usual state, I saw an interminable sea before my mind, and many objects inside this sea. Some of them were small, some bigger, some remained on the surface of the sea and were simply wet. Others went down to the bottom, becoming soaked with water inside and out. Others then went down so deep as to become dissolved inside the sea. Now while I was seeing this, my always lovable Jesus came and told me, "My beloved daughter, did you see that? The sea symbolizes my immensity, while the objects, different in size, the souls who live in my will, the different ways of being, some on the surface, some down, some dissolved within me, vary according to how they live in my volition, some in an imperfect way, some in a more perfect way, and others reaching the point of dissolving completely in my will. Nothing is forcing a soul, once she has entered into the sea, to swim down, down, down into the deepest depths of the sea. And Jesus often emphasizes the importance of repeating the acts in the divine will. He says that when we repeat our acts in the divine will, we grow deeper and deeper and deeper, right? But understanding what that means is like when we repeat our acts in the divine will, when we do our acts in the divine will, we are saying yes wholeheartedly in every instant to God's will for us in that moment. And if there is, going back to the clouds reading, like if there is a voluntary defect present in your soul, then you're not really repeating your act. You're forming clouds around the sun inside of you, and you're not really going to be able to grow from these degrees. And so Jesus does not say that a soul who lives in the divine will has to end up in this fourth degree eventually. He actually says that some souls will never reach this full completion, even though they received the great gift of living in the divine will. And that's okay. Not everybody has to. You take as much of it as you want. He tells Luisa that even if Adam had passed the test, all of his souls would have been born with the gift of the divine will, but it would have been up to them if they wanted it or not, and how much of it they wanted. And so, okay, yeah, there are 4 degrees. And as we grow closer and closer toward the center, it's not just about the number of acts we do in the divine will or how long we have been living in it, but the extent to which we have been abandoned to God's purifying action within us, because he wants us to be actually saints. This 4th degree would be a perfection in all the virtues. Now, while this writing talks about imperfect, perfect, and complete as how deep we are in the divine will. Okay, now I'm going to read from Volume 19, July 26, 1926, and this is the writing about the 4 degrees of living in the divine will. I think this is a very important writing, and a lot of teachers seem to think that as well, because this is brought up a lot if you listen to divine will videos. Now, I think this is also a point that is misinterpreted by a lot of teachers, because if you pay attention, you will hear that everybody has a slightly different opinion on what this means, because, like I said, these writings are not... There is not an official doctrine on how to interpret these writings yet. I'm going to share what my opinion is. Pray about this, take it or leave it. So now I'm going to read. My daughter, the light of the sun is not enjoyed equally by all. Not because of the sun, since my works, containing the universal good, do good to all, with no restriction of any kind, but because of creatures. Imagine a person who remains in his room. This is describing a soul in the 1st degree. He does not enjoy all the vividness of the light, and if he enjoys a mild light, he does not enjoy its heat. There is someone else, then, who is outside of the built-up area. And so I interpret this to mean that this is someone who has actually moved outside of the house, the hut of their human will, that is forming a barrier to the sun. They've moved outside of the house. That means making that decision, that definitive decision to live in the divine will. He enjoys more light. He feels the heat of the sun. Keyword is heat here. The heat purifies and disinfects the putrid air, and in enjoying the purified air, he becomes stronger and feels healthier. So the 2nd person enjoys more of the goods that the sun brings to the earth. But move forward. There is a 3rd person who goes and puts himself at that point in which the solar rays hit the surface of the earth. This one feels invested by its rays. He feels burned by the heat of the sun. The vividness of its light is such that, his eyes being filled with it, he can hardly look at the earth. He sees himself as though transfused, one could say, into the very light. He feels little of the earth, of himself, and only because he has his feet on the ground, but he lives only for the sun. See what a great difference exists between the 1st, the 2nd, and the 3rd. There are great differences between these degrees. But move even further. A 4th person takes flight into the solar rays and rises up to the center of the sphere. Jesus speaks to Luisa often about not only living in the divine will, but centering herself in the divine will. The intensity of the light eclipses him completely, in such a way that he remains dissolved, consumed within the sun itself. This fourth person can no longer look at the earth nor think of himself. And if he does look, he will look at light, he will feel fire. So for him all things have ended. Light and heat have taken the place of his life. What a difference between the third and the fourth. However, all this difference does not depend on the sun, but on creatures, and how they expose themselves to the light of the sun. I think especially comparing that to that other reading we read about how you become confirmed in good, you're no longer capable of falling, enrolled in the celestial militia like the souls in heaven. I believe that sounds awfully similar to what this fourth person is being described as. Okay, so after giving that analogy, Jesus goes back to give more detail about what life is like for each of these people. He says, "These people are the image of the 4 degrees of living in my will. One can say that the first one does not live in its kingdom, but only in the light which, from my kingdom, the Son of my will diffuses to all. One can say that he is outside of its boundaries, and if he enjoys a limited light, it is because of the nature of light, which diffuses everywhere. His nature, his weaknesses, and passions form as though a house around him." Okay, think about this. His nature, weaknesses, and passions. Like, this isn't somebody who's necessarily living in, like, grave mortal sin all the time. Like, this is describing someone who's just experiencing the slavery of living with their concupiscence, right? Passions are like the emotions that you have that are disordered. Weaknesses, like, it's the weakness of your will, it's frailty. This isn't describing someone who is hardened in sin, right? This is describing someone who's just living the Christian life. Okay, his nature, his weaknesses, and passions form as though a house around him. They form infected and putrid air, and in breathing it, he lives as sickly and without liveliness of strength in doing good. But in spite of all this, he is resigned. He bears to his best the encounters of life, because the light of my will, mild as it may be, always brings its good. So I can see this as, and I think this is important to maybe be open to, I can see this as somebody who has been studying the writings of Luisa for years and years and years, but has not yet made that definitive step of giving up their will once and for all, that firm decision that's necessary, right? And the light of the truths are helping them, but they don't yet live in the kingdom. And now what we do in the divine will, like if you go to those prayer cynicles, you'll probably hear about praying the rounds, about reciting the entering in prayer, praying the consecration to divine will, saying the words, I lay down my will once and for all. Please, Jesus, give me yours in return. And I was talking to a monk recently about this, and he gave an analogy that makes a lot of sense to me. Like, it's like a seminarian who is practicing a dry mass before he is actually ordained a priest, right? Like, he's praying the words of consecration over the bread, but it does not become Jesus. He's not actually saying a mass, he's just practicing. And it's going to help him ultimately. That practice is going to help him when he actually does, like, say the mass, and it's disposing him to be prepared for it. You could say practice. You can practice doing the rounds, even though you're not necessarily consecrated yet in order to be able to do it. Like, there is a disposition that's necessary to actually enter into the kingdom, but you can still benefit from the light the more windows you open in your house. And if you open so many windows, then one day your whole house is just going to become a window, and then you're going to be in the light, you know? So yeah, keep going, but just don't let pride get in the way, because I do think too, like, if people, well, I said this in my other video, like, I think people can believe that they are living in the divine will because they said that formula. I enter into the divine will, I remove the pebble of my will and give it to God. But if you don't have that disposition of heart, then you're not actually ready to do that, and you're not doing it. Nothing happens. So that was my spiel. That was my kind of controversial opinion about the first degree. So now the second degree, Jesus continues. The second is the image of one who has entered the first steps of the boundaries of the kingdom of the supreme will. This one enjoys not only more light, but also the heat. Therefore, the air he breathes is pure, and in breathing it, he feels passions die within him. He is constant in good. He bears the crosses not only with resignation, but with love. However, since he is at the first steps of the boundaries, he looks at the earth and feels the weight of the human nature. The third is the image of one who has advanced into the boundaries of this kingdom, and its light is such and so great as to make him forget everything. He no longer feels anything of himself. Good, virtues, crosses change into his own nature. The light eclipses him, transforms him, and just barely allows him to look from afar at what no longer belongs to him. Okay, so this is pretty intense, right? This is saying like he completely forgets himself. He doesn't think of himself. This person is someone who virtues, good, crosses, suffering, they change into his own nature, right? And I think we have a clue of what may happen here based upon Volume 11, February 14th, Valentine's Day, 1912. Continuing in my usual state, my always adorable Jesus came while I was telling him, "Tell me, O Jesus, how it comes about that after you have disposed the soul to suffering, and she loves suffering, knowing the goodness contained in it, and she suffers almost with passion, believing that her destiny is to suffer. At that very moment, you take this treasure away from her." And Jesus, "My daughter, my love is great, my rule is insuperable, my teachings sublime, my instructions divine, creative, and inimitable. Therefore, in order to make all things, great or small, natural or spiritual, painful or pleasant, acquire one single color and have one single value, once the soul has been trained to suffer and arrives at the point of loving it, I let this suffering pass into her will as her own property. So, every time I will send her a pain, she will always be disposed to suffer it and to love it, since she keeps within her will the property and the dispositions. I look at things in the will, and it is as if the soul always suffered, even if she does not suffer. Further, in order for pleasure to have the same value as suffering, and in order for praying, working, eating, sleeping, in sum, everything, whatever they might be, to have one single value, since all can be if things are of my will, I allow the soul to practice all things in my will with holy indifference. So it may seem to the soul that just as I give her something, I take it away from her, but this is not true. Rather, it happens that at the beginning, when the soul is not yet well trained, she is sensitive in the suffering, praying, or loving. I would say this is someone in the second degree, right? Because you're still feeling the weight of your human nature. But when, with practice, these things pass in her will as her own property, the sensitivity ceases. This is moving into the third degree when he says the soul no longer feels anything of herself. So understand that this is the goal. This is where Jesus is going to be taking you, and understand that in order for you to get to this point of being indifferent to suffering, of having suffering in your own heart as your own nature, so that it's as if you're always suffering with that value and the merit of it as well. Like, Jesus has to bring you through suffering and bring you to a point where you love it. And so, I would say as you feel yourself being drawn into this, pray for the grace to love the cross. Pray for the grace to fully embrace it, and pray for the grace to fully embrace the virtues. And this is why I say, like, it's very important to not form clouds around the sun within you, as the divine will is working in you, trying to pull you into the third degree, because resistance to the cross is going to keep you from getting to that place where you love the cross so much that it's part of your nature and you are imperturbable and everything is the same, right? And this is something that has to happen if you want to attain that complete fullness of being enlisted in the celestial militia on earth, just as in heaven, that we talked about in every sense of the word, right? You don't have to reach that if you don't want it, right? So after the third degree comes the fourth. The fourth is the happiest, because he is the image of one who not only lives in my kingdom, but has acquired it. This is what Adam never reached, because he never passed the test. This one undergoes the total consummation in the supreme sun of my will. The eclipse caused by its light is so intense that he himself becomes light and heat. So that analogy I was talking about before, like you go from being a tabernacle to being the host itself. Nor can he look at anything else but light and fire, and all things convert for him into light and love. Therefore, there will be a difference of degrees in the kingdom of my will, according to how much the creatures will want to take from its goods. But the first degrees will be spurs and paths in order to reach the last one. For you then, Luisa, who must make it known, there is all the necessity to live in the last degree. So, we can have as much of this or as little of this as we want. We don't have to undergo the complete consummation if we don't want to, right? Luisa, it was necessary for her to, and I actually, most teachers will agree to that Luisa underwent this fourth degree, this total consummation, in volume 4 in her fourth spiritual marriage. On that later, it's okay if you don't know what that means, but basically like what I'm saying is like she was in this for a long time. This was like the early writings was when this happened to her. Now this is another way we can understand what it really means to live in the fourth degree, what that might actually look like. I think the writings make it seem like everything is absolutely perfect. When that person's in the fourth degree, they no longer have any sort of negative emotion ever. They never feel weak, and they never feel any sort of inclination that may be a temptation. Like, they never feel even the shadow of that anger rise up, right? But we can see in Luisa that was not the case for her. She entered into that fourth degree, into that perfect consummation in the earliest volumes, yet even in the latest volumes, she was still struggling with things. And what I mean by that is that she would feel sometimes her imperfections that were still within her human will, because, yeah, this gift is not erasing from us completely like the fallen nature that we have inherited. Like the divine will is purifying constantly that stain of original sin, in the sense that it is a continuous miracle that we are allowed to be in the presence of God. But the thing is like that's God's perspective, but the soul itself is still feeling their human nature. So like their weaknesses, miseries, passions, and tendencies. And Luisa would even feel these in the latest volumes. And she used to be really, really worried about it. She would think that she was like impure, she was sinning. She was like, Jesus, why am I so... You say that I'm in your will, and you talk about how it's necessary to be so pure in your will, so why do I feel so bad? Like, why am I so bad all the time? Like, even after all this, because she would still feel that shadow self, right? That initial, like, temptation. And Jesus tells her, he tells her not to worry about it. He says that, yeah, your human will is not annihilated, like, literally. Like, it's still there. It will still always be there, but it's, and like with your human will, because you're born in original sin, right? It comes with a sickness. It comes with a certain tendency, right? And that tendency is not going to be obliterated until heaven. Like, you are going to feel that. But the difference is how you feel it, how intensely you feel it, and the effect that it has upon you. What Jesus tells Luisa is that her human will is a footstool to the divine will. And so he tells her, whenever you feel your human will want to have life, it's like it starts to move a little bit under your foot, and then you can just go, no. Like, no, we don't do that. And he says, like, there's more merit in that, and there is beauty and infinite goodness that he creates out of the very weaknesses and miseries themselves when we keep them under our feet. How I see the progression through the degrees is kind of like your human will, and by that I really mean the concupiscence that your human will has inherited, your particular fallen tendencies, the thing that you struggle with. So like the example I used was like anger, right? Like before you live in the divine will, it's like this, it kind of rules you, it kind of controls you, right? You're kind of a slave to your passions. You're a slave towards your inclinations. And then when you start to enter into the second degree, it's kind of like, okay, they're being moved down. And so now like you're feeling the weight of your human nature on your shoulders. And it's slowly being purified, it's being pulverized, and it's a battle, right? It's heavy, it's a cross, you're carrying it. He's bringing you to a place, and slowly, little by little, the more that you push it down, which is hard, right? And you got to cooperate with Jesus's purifying action in you to really push it down. Slowly, it becomes less and less of an issue, and it's being pushed all the way down to below your feet. And so it's not on your shoulders anymore. You don't feel the weight of it anymore when you're in the fourth degree, for example. Like, but you still have it. You still feel it. Sometimes it's a shadow self. We never obliterate it. We never lose it. But the difference is in how it affects us. Because Jesus tells Luisa that for a soul who has like really lives in the fullness of the divine will, it's like when a temptation comes to them, it's just like a fly, you brush it off. When before it would be like you're kind of ruled by that, right? And then as you're being pulled into this place, into the fourth degree, it's like you still have to go through that battle of fighting so that it no longer rules you, right? There's a transition that happens, and that's why as we progress further along in this and go through these trials and tests, yeah, he says around the third degree, these things start becoming natural to you. They kind of stop, your will kind of starts to live underneath your feet when you're in the third degree, because you're barely feeling the weight of your human nature. Like you're barely feeling your weaknesses and passions. And this reminds me of a chart that I made last fall. I had asked Jesus this question because I wanted to understand the gift more. I was asking him if Adam lived in that fourth degree and that perfect fullness, and I believe that Jesus inspired me to this. Basically, there are two different paths in this divine will gift, right? So souls who were created immaculate and souls who were born in sin. Luisa was born in original sin, right? The only three souls that will be in this category are Adam, Eve, and Mary. And I mean, of course, Jesus too, if you want to count him. He's a divine person. But yeah, Adam, Eve, and Mary did not have a fallen human nature to have to battle against. And so they were already created immaculately with no evil tendencies, no concupiscence in the divine will, right? But for us who are born in original sin, we are born with concupiscence. We start out in the first degree, right? This first degree really meaning like the union of wills, or maybe not even the union of wills, just striving to do God's will, right? The sanctity of the saints of the past. Not born in the divine will, but then in order to enter into the divine will, so to enter into that place where Adam and Eve started out, what's necessary is a firm, ardent desire and resolution, and even to get to this place, a certain amount of purification would really be necessary, right? I mean, I'd say it's an exception that somebody is just automatically ready to completely and utterly surrender their will with that firm desire, right? Like you have to have a certain amount of purification before that, right? So now you have the second degree. You're living in the divine will, you're capable of falling, you feel the weight of the cross. In the third degree, living in the divine will, capable of falling, but you don't feel the weight of the cross. That's kind of the difference between these two places. And I have it listed in blue because this means living in the divine will. And you can compare the second and third degrees to the state that Adam, Eve, and Mary were in before they were tested, right? And of course, they had a difference, right? Mary was able to enter from this blue stage to the yellow stage pretty much instantaneously, right? She did this in the womb. Like she was in the womb, she was in this blue stage, she passed her test, and she was in this yellow stage. And so, yeah, but that's because Jesus tells Luisa that like Mary, it was a lot easier for her because she wasn't battling a fallen nature. And it actually, like Jesus says, it's a prodigy and it's a miracle that, I mean, it's a prodigy and a miracle that any soul can live in the divine will. But it's even more of a prodigy and miracle that Luisa can live in the divine will and that we can than it was for Mary because she was immaculate. Like, it's a prodigy that souls who have the stain of original sin can live in the divine will. And so that's why we have a longer journey to go through, right? Adam and Eve, they did not need any purification. They were living in the divine will and they were capable of falling. So that's what these two the blues have in common. Living in the divine will, capable of falling. Yeah, Adam and Eve had no purification necessary. They had no fallen human will to knock down or bad habits to undo. They did not have the fallen human nature to feel, and they were not weak like us because like they were fully united with the divine will. They were perfectly healthy. And so here what comes next is the test. After we have gone through a certain amount of a crash course, a background work, learning more about the divine will, being purified, and bringing us to a state where we are comfortable living without the burden of our will, where we're comfortable and we don't feel the weight of a cross, then we are finally able to pass a test, and we're finally strong enough to be fully entrusted with the full kingdom of the divine will. And so this is where Mary was. This yellow state is where Adam and Eve never reached. But this is where Mary reached in the womb after she passed her test. In that moment, the entire kingdom of the divine will was safely established in her soul. And you can compare this to the 4 degrees writing, where it says that this 4th degree is the image of one who not only lives in the divine will, but has acquired the whole entire kingdom, right? And in this stage, the soul is confirmed in good. They're confirmed in grace. They're incapable anymore of falling. And the same thing can happen for us as happens to Mary. Incapable of falling, although little exits still possible, entire kingdom safely established in soul. So these little exits, these are what Jesus talks to Luisa about, because she still does live with the original fallen human will, and she does still have these tendencies. She has the tendency to worry sometimes. She has the worry to give into fears and little disturbances and her little inattentivenesses. Mary did not have these tendencies, right? She did not have doubts and fears, and she did not have, which of course, doubts and fears, they're not sins. They would not kick you out of the divine will, but it's like those clouds that I was talking about. These little exits, these doubts, these fears, these shadows of the human will that we still, because we still have our human will. These shadows of the human will, when we don't stomp on it immediately and we kind of let the human will breathe a little bit, the fallen part of the human will, when we let that fallen part breathe and have a little bit of life within us, then we form clouds around the sun. Even if we're incapable of truly falling, of committing sin, we're still able to cloud up the action of the divine will within us and impede our further growth, because even after the 4th degree, there's more and more and more growing. There's never ever a point where we're done growing. Even for Mary, she never stopped growing. But yeah, she did not have little exits, though.
Now, all of these charts, a lot of this kind of came together for me last fall when I was asking Jesus a million questions about this. And I really believe that he gave me light to understand this, because I did not see all these connections before. But another connection that I saw was the connection with the 4 nuptials and the 4 degrees. Luisa went through 4 nuptials during her life, and those nuptial means marriage. So she went through 4 marriages to God. And the first marriage that she experienced was the marriage of union of wills. And that's the same, it's the 2 candles becoming one flame, right? It's basically the journey that all of the saints go through and experience at a certain point, that the sanctity of being unified with God's will. The mystics would experience big visions, and it would be a dramatic thing, but the souls who did not experience visions, like Saint Teresa of Lisieux, for example, she did not have a vision where she was mystically married to Jesus, but that was still the state of her soul nonetheless. And a lot of people don't realize that we're all called and invited into this, and it is the normal progression of Christian life, although the problem is a lot of people don't believe they can have it, and they don't want it, and they don't put the work and cooperate with God's grace, so they never actually reach it. But basically there's that mystical marriage, and then the next mystical marriage that she experienced. So the first one was at age 23. The second one was at age 24, and that was one where Jesus took possession of her heart. And this is something unprecedented in Luisa's writings, that all the saints only ever had one mystical marriage. But I believe that second mystical marriage, the one she experienced at age 24, that was when she first experienced living in the divine will, when she received the gift of living in the divine will. She received the third nuptial, was the marriage of the cross, becoming fully and utterly identified with Jesus' humanity. And then the 4th spiritual marriage, which was she received at age 35, was that total consummation of the Son of the Supreme Will. She took possession of Jesus's heart, and they became utterly consummated with each other. So although most of us are not mystics and we're not going to have big dramatic visions of this, we are still called along the same path. Like, this will actually like happen to our souls interiorly as we progress. Yeah, so this is a chart of the degrees of living in the divine will and how I see them correlating to the 4 marriages that Luisa went through. So Luisa received her first spiritual nuptial marriage with Jesus, which is the type of marriage that the Sanctity of the Saints of the past had at age 23, before the marriage of divinity to age 24. And what I think is that this shows us that it is necessary to empty ourselves and unite our will to Jesus before we have space to receive the gift of his will into our own. But I believe this disposition can happen in an instant with God's grace if the soul is completely willing to receive it. And so I have heard it said before that the essence of spiritual marriage, this spiritual marriage, the essence of spiritual marriage is union of wills. And so you don't need to have gone through the entire purification of dark night of the soul and like being perfected in virtue and all of that stuff that the saints went through, but just that union of wills to the extent that you're firm in your desire to not sin anymore. And I think that Jesus had Luisa go through spiritual marriage before she received the gift of living in the divine will to show us like that there is background work that is necessary before you can just start living in the divine will. Like this first degree, you could say it could include all souls that exist, lukewarm souls, fervent souls, and then moving up the ladder, the firm desire to do God's will in all things no matter the cost, the desire to sin no more and to be empty of all that is impure. So then after that happens, that spiritual marriage, you could say, a spiritual marriage of sorts, a union of wills, then you're ready for a marriage to the divinity, which is when you become fused with Jesus. The two candles become one candle. So in this degree, though, the soul is being purified of her old habits and her passions are being pulverized as she continues to receive the acts of the divine will into her soul and to do your best to not form clouds around those acts, right? Jesus will protect you from intentional sin because you've already given him your will and it's safe in his hands. But the soul is still looking at the earth and at her old life. And so then what happens is the nuptial of the cross. And this happened to Luisa. Baptism of victimhood. Yeah, basically it's where you become another Jesus, where you start to identify yourself with Christ, right? And this is what happened. The saints went through this as well. Like they got to a certain point where they put on Christ. They offered themselves for the salvation of souls. They were no longer living for themselves. They were living for others. And so it's not victimhood in the sense of being beaten down and I'm not important and everybody can just walk all over me, but like that free offering to God of I am yours and I put myself last behind everybody else, right? That I am third. And I'm willing to suffer for others. And this is when you get to that point, then Jesus begins to crucify you in whatever way he chooses. For Luisa, it was a literal mystical crucifixion. That probably won't happen to any of you, but, who knows. The soul barely feels anything of themselves. Goods, virtues, crosses change into her own nature. The soul continues receiving the complete acts from God to build the kingdom within her soul. Because every divine act, these complete acts, these divine acts from God that he deposits into your soul are like building blocks for the kingdom. But yeah, so the cross is really what brings the soul to a state of stability. And after the death comes the resurrection, the total transformation into the beloved, the fourth nuptial, the fourth marriage. This is the image of a soul who not only lives in the kingdom but has acquired it. The kingdom of the divine will is firmly established in the soul. So not just a bunch of blocks, not just building blocks of the individual acts, but the entire kingdom can be established in you, can be deposited in you, because God can see that you are stable and firm enough, and you have proven your love through the furnace of the cross. Because only after death can we really resurrect, right? Unless a grain of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it cannot bear fruit, right? This is the final confirmation in good, and so this is when you can really start to live heaven on earth. And yeah, this doesn't have to happen at the end of your life. For Luisa, this happened early on before she really began her mission, right? Like, it was after Jesus brought her through these nuptials that she was really, really ready. He made her a fully fledged soldier at the end of this, after she was resurrected, you could say, into that fourth degree. But yeah, it's only through the cross that we can have this, and the consummation of the cross, not a begrudging crucifixion, but really allowing Jesus to complete the crucifixion within us.
All right, now while Jesus has given us these writings on spiritual growth, the last thing he wants is for us to obsess about where we are in the spiritual life or think too much about how we're doing and try to pinpoint exactly where we are. Like, there's many writings throughout the volumes where he tells Luisa that it's just better if you don't look at yourself, if you don't think about how you're doing, if you're just looking at him and focusing on loving him. It's a lot more fun that way. You'll make way more progress anyway. The reason he gave us the 4 degrees writings was because he wants us to have a certain sense of where this journey is headed so that we can prepare accordingly, so that we can respond accordingly in the moment, and know that this is a part of it. And he wants us to know these things so that we don't become stuck along the way in the journey, because he wants us to reach that complete fullness, and he's whetting our appetite a little bit for what it is, for what it looks like. And yeah, he does that to motivate us because he wants to see us succeed. He wants to see us reach our fullness of life. And he will bring us there if we only desire it. We don't need to obsess about it. There's nothing we could do to force ourselves to get there. You know, like, this is all his doing, but we can help speed along the process very, very much by being incredibly docile, by making a decision to be open for those opportunities, be aware for when he's going to test my virtue and put me in situations that stretch me so that I can grow and overcome. And the crosses, he's going to give me crosses that I can embrace and love, and so that I can get to that state of serenity, right? If you know that this is a part of the plan, then you're going to be able to reach the goal more efficiently, right? So there was one volume where Luisa was thinking to herself one day. A thought came to her mind, and sometimes when these thoughts come to her mind, Jesus tells her he's answering in advance the questions that he knew that we would have while we're reading it, and so he infuses these thoughts in her mind, and sometimes they're silly questions, but they're ours. So somebody was wondering this, and Luisa thought it so that Jesus could answer it. And Luisa was thinking to herself, I wonder what would be better if a soul focuses primarily on sanctifying herself or on growing in virtue, or if a soul forgets about that and just focuses on love, on trying to save souls, like on trying to unite to Jesus for the salvation of souls, to share in his work. And he came and he interrupted her thought and he answered her and he said, both of these things are good if a soul occupies herself with sanctifying herself, of growing in virtue and in union with me. Like, this is a wonderful, admirable thing, and that's good. But it is so much better if a soul forgets about herself, forgets even about attaining union with God, and just pours herself out for the salvation of souls. In the first instance, she would be at the expense of herself, but at the second instance, she would be at the expense of Jesus's own humanity. She would be sharing in his life more, and he will bring her exponentially quicker to union. And so we see this in the kids at Fatima. Mary came and appeared to them, and she told them that souls were falling into hell like snowflakes, and they were 6 years old. One of the youngest one was 6 years old. I think the oldest was 10, and she asked them to pray the rosary every day, many times a day, and she asked them to make sacrifices for souls. And these kids just, they gave up so much. They offered their entire lives for the salvation of souls. They didn't care about themselves anymore because she showed them that vision of hell, and they just didn't want anybody to go there. And this brought them to a place of extreme sanctity very, very quickly, because they were just ordinary kids before. They were fooling around praying the rosary before. Yeah, they were being lazy. They were being lazy about praying the rosary before. But then after this, Mary appeared to them, and they showed them this and invited them into this life of victimhood. That's really what victimhood is. We can become victim souls by sharing in Christ's redemptive work, and it doesn't have to be somebody who's just in bed with the stigmata. We're all invited into this, and Mary appeared to these children because she wanted to show us that this is something for everyone. I always go back to, well, if you don't feel like you're there yet, then just ask for the desire for that, inviting Jesus to infuse in your heart a desire for the salvation of souls that's so overflowing that you would want to offer yourself as a victim for them. That's one thing. One thing we can keep in mind is go that route, if we want to go quickly, don't think about yourself, just think about saving souls. Offer yourself without reserve. And then whenever these instances come into your life, like you can be looking at Jesus, growing more and more in love with him, asking him to increase your love for him always, and increasing in you the desire to suffer out of love for him and for souls. Then when these things come to you, like when you have to exercise a virtue, when somebody's annoying you, like when you stub your toe, all of it, the predominant thing on your mind is no longer me. The predominant thing on your mind is God always. It's this paradigm shift that occurs when you go into this route of victimhood. And it's a special grace he will give you. He will give it to you if you want it and you're open to it. Like, where you don't. All that being said, at the end of the day, you will get out of this what you put into it. Because there is a great difference between one who is all attention, all eyes, and all heart for his will, and one who just wants it, without any special attention. The truth is that we will never learn how to be attentive to his will if we do not take the steps to purge ourselves of the noise and distraction in our lives. In the early volumes, when Jesus was purifying Luisa of her attachments, he asked her to eliminate all distractions, all noise, and all selfish diversions. How much of your free time do you spend indulging yourself with vain curiosities about what is happening in the church and in the world? Because the devil often distracts pious souls with things that seem holy, but in reality are hindrances to attaining true depth and intimacy with God. How much of your free time do you dedicate to your relationship with God? How much of an effort do you make to remain in conversation with him? Do you fight to maintain a docile awareness of his presence even during your duties and work? Because it's never going to happen if you don't put up a fight. Jesus tells many of his mystics that a soul who talks much is empty of God, and that one of the worst hindrances to growth is a soul who speaks often and unnecessarily, sometimes even about holy things. Are you the kind of person who speaks more than you listen? Because Jesus is a gentleman. He will never interrupt you while you're speaking. How much time do you spend in intentional silent prayer? Do you strive to maintain that attitude of interior silence throughout the day as well? Do you try to cultivate it in others through your example? Make time for God. Make time for him in daily mass if you can. Make time for him in adoration. Consecrate yourself to Our Lady and pray the rosary every day, even if it's only in the car. It doesn't matter your state in life. You should be able to dedicate at least an hour every single day to prayer and spiritual reading, even if it means getting out of bed an hour earlier. Make time to read these writings and in absorbing other good spiritual works like The Imitation of Christ or The Way of Perfection. You can even listen to these things on YouTube while you work. But don't just absorb these knowledges, put them into practice, because knowledge is completely useless if it doesn't transform you. There is no such thing as a holiness that doesn't hurt. And there is no such thing as a holiness that won't cost you anything. Like Jesus says, you can have as much of this or as little of this as you desire. But that desire will ultimately be measured by the time, effort, and serious energy that you put into this practically. When it all comes down to it, it's really simple. How much of your daily routine are you willing to give to God? The choice will always be yours. Fiat voluntas tua, my friends. Let's do this.